When we come back to those principles and recognize that we just have to figure out a way to make them happen in these new conditions, we build a better society.
We came to make a change.
Welcome all of you to Stand Together with Heather Cox Richardson. You know, we all got together a year ago on the eve of the inauguration, and it just felt like the right thing to do to bring all of us back together with Heather exactly 1 year later, to take stock, stay informed, and continue to stand together to take action. My name is Katie Paris. I'm the founder of Red Wine and Blue, which is a community of over 650,000 women working together all across the country to stand up to extremism in our own backyards and also across this country. We do have women working together in all 50 states, including as a part of 800 Red, Wine, and Blue Troubled Nation groups all across the country. I know it's hard to believe that we are a year in to Trump's second term. You're not alone in feeling that way. Polling indicates that the majority of Americans feel both uneasy and frustrated, and only 21% feel satisfied. There are more of us than them. That's why Fox News is trying to dismiss us as organized gangs of wine moms. Now, most of you all know by now that the wine is very much optional, and we are not all moms. But I'll tell you one thing that they got exactly right. It's that we are organized. Are you guys ready for Heather? Let's bring her on. Rockstar historian, all of our favorites, Heather Cox Richardson. How are you hanging in there? And truly, are you ready for this year in review?
I'm ready for the year in review. I will say that I think I'm where a lot of people are. I'm tired, and I don't mean sleepy tired. I just mean that stuff comes at us constantly. And I just feel like maybe other people get this. I feel like my brain just keeps having to adjust to yet another story. And, you know, there are a number of people who send me stories, and they have different ways of calling my attention to things that they think are really important. And I can't tell you, when I get a pair of eyes from somebody, or when I get an expletive from somebody else, I just think, do I really want to look and see what this story is? But of course you have to do it, because this is our moment to bear witness and to react and to rebuild. And so, you know, I think like everybody else, I'm tired, but I'm here for the long haul, and I got muscles now that I didn't have in 2016. So here we go.
I mean, and that is what you do. That is how you serve all of us, is by documenting day in and day out what is happening in our country. So there is no one better to do this with than you. So thank you.
We're all bringing our A game, right? And my A game happens to be that I know how to write history. You know,
yes, you do.
There's not many other things I know. I clean windows really well too. But right now, you don't need me for that. So right now, that's what I can do.
I wish I was good at replacing furnaces. We both could use that help right now. But
right.
All right, let's dive into what you're really good at, telling history. Okay, we're going to start with the beginning of the term. Let's start with Doge. Okay, so in early 2025, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency began upending the federal workforce. It was quietly disbanded in late 2025 after massive criticism about lack of transparency, not really even saving the country money as they had claimed, and of course, the very public breakup between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. What are the lasting real-world consequences of Doge, and why do you think Trump gave up on it? What does that say about his use of presidential power?
So the first thing to think about with what I prefer to call doggy or dodgy, because I'm not at all convinced that it was ever a legal entity at all, is that it right out of the box, it attacked the Constitution and really showed how this administration was going to work outside the Constitution, not just breaking the law or breaking the articles of the Constitution, but pretending they didn't exist. And what I mean by that is that the way our system works is that when Congress, which is made up of our elected representatives, wants to do something, they pass a law for the government to do something, and they then appropriate money to make that happen. That's in the Constitution. That is how our system works. And then the president has a job to take care that the laws are executed. And the are faithfully executed. And he does not have any kind of leeway about whether or not to do what Congress says or to use that money as Congress said he should. And just to the degree that that was ever questioned under Richard Nixon, Congress wrote another law called the Impoundment Act that said, no, 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 you can't do that, President. You must simply do what Congress said. So when Doggy got in there and decided that it was going to simply say, well, we don't care what Congress appropriated or anything, we're just going to go ahead and make cuts. That was a neon flashing light that we were not in Kansas anymore. And so that issue there, that issue of impoundment, the idea that the president can decide how to spend money, that's still on the table. It is still unconstitutional and it is still illegal. And to my mind, one of the first things that we really knew we were in trouble. But then there were other things that have continued to be important about Doggy. And that the biggie is that while theoretically they were cutting spending, what they were really doing was going through our private information held by the government. And they managed to walk away with a lot of that, including we learned today with files from the Social Security Administration that have been checking against voter registration. I mean, this stuff is highly illegal. There was all sorts of ways in which that information was supposed to be protected, and that is still out there. Now, there's a third way, though, that Doggy mattered. And that's that one of the ways the extremists rose was by convincing their voters that an active government was funneling money from their tax dollars and giving it into the hands of undeserving Americans. And what Doggy really illustrated by cutting things that we cared deeply about was that that wasn't true, that the federal government was already cut to the bone. In fact, it has increased almost not at all in the civil service since the 1960s, even though the country has grown dramatically. Where our growth in the government has come is from the private contracting, primarily in the military. And what people started to realize was that this idea that somehow the federal government was bloated because it was funneling money to undeserving, you know, people in the inner cities or whatever the offense du jour was untrue. And so that has been a real problem, I think, for the ideology of the Republicans and the MAGAs that have grown from them is the fact that Americans are waking up to the fact that, hey, they actually quite like the CDC and they quite like the National Weather Service and they quite like the Department of Education. So those three things really jump out to me about the Department of Government Efficiency.
So part of the project here was to scapegoat people and thinking that that's what's really sucking us dry, right? That it's not only the federal government, but people using federal government resources. People are sort of seeing some of the con of that. And to me, I'm going to skip ahead actually to the other question sort of about economic pain, because that's what this is often about, the scapegoating, right? You know, it's pointing a finger at I'm feeling pain. And so who can I blame for that pain? And so if the lie sort of emerged with Doge, then meanwhile, we had Trump setting himself up as the hero, coming in and taking these dramatic actions, such as with tariffs, that were supposedly going to punish other countries and save us all and make things cheaper for ourselves. And in fact, we have seen the opposite take place. So I guess essentially, if the promise from many of Trump's voters that essentially they were buying into this idea by voting for him, that he thought that he would bring down costs, whether that was going to be by making cuts so that people that don't look like me, you know, were no longer taking from the system, or if it was that he was going to come in here and heroically do things like make other countries pay to bring down prices. But instead, what we're seeing is that prices are up across the board. To what extent do you think all of this and the ongoing economic pain all Americans are feeling could be what's causing cracks in the MAGA coalition?
I think it's definitely causing cracks. I'm not sure that's yet what is causing the biggest cracks, but you
Yeah.
didn't mention healthcare. You know, the what they are calling the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which did not extend the tax credits for buying healthcare insurance on the Affordable Care Act markets, was a huge thing, not just because it meant that a lot of people were not going to be able to afford their healthcare and would fall off of it, and that would drive premiums up for everybody else. But look around you. I mean, we're losing clinics here and hospitals here in the state of Maine. Ironically, the people that are worst hit by things like that are people in Republican districts, Republican counties,
Yep.
especially. So they're hurting themselves primarily. So that's definitely part of it. I will say with the tariffs and the fights over tariffs, the insecurity that's caused in our economy, and the way that's slowed growth and slowed job creation, all of those are real issues and people are feeling them. One of the things I think we are downplaying and ought to be doing a lot more with is the extraordinary corruption of this administration. It is off the freaking charts. And when you're sitting there hearing from the secretary of the Department of Agriculture that you should be able to live on $15 a day, when Trump has put, like billions and billions and billions into his pocket, I just feel like that's not a recipe for a stable country, a stable economy, or a stable family life. And that's something that I feel like we should be talking about a lot more than we are.
And the examples are abundant. I mean, now we're seeing that with oil, the money out of Venezuela, too, going
Crazy.
into an account that Trump controls. I mean,
In Qatar. Yeah, yeah, it didn't go through the US Treasury. It's sitting over there in Qatar.
right. So whether it's gilded in gold ballrooms or, yes, in accounts in Qatar, it feels like there are certainly ample examples, whether it's to the $15 a day we're having massive childcare cuts in addition to healthcare premiums skyrocketing. That is something that all of us can be talking to the people that we know about, and this is just everyday, like, basic contrasts that don't make sense to anyone. So Heather, once again, bringing the receipts on helping us have these better conversations out there to share good information. Okay, I want to talk about public education. As you know, we here at Red, Wine, and Blue and in Trouble Nation groups across the country have been working to fight book bans, attacks on teachers, librarians. And that was, even before this, before Trump's second term began. In March of 2025, he signed an executive order to close the Department of Education. Can we just talk for a second about why attacking public education is so central to authoritarian movements and what's at stake for democracy itself when public education is weakened?
I always like to remind people that education and the idea of public education is a profoundly human drive and one that is deeply embedded in the whole concept of democracy. So if you think about the way the world works, and if you think about the period before the what we know of as the Enlightenment, the way that rulers managed a society was simply telling them that because of religion or because of their nationality or because of families, there were certain ways the world should work, and they were supposed to shut up and do what they were told. And one of the things that the Enlightenment does is that it says, now, wait just a minute here. Human beings have brains, and there is a series of sort of natural laws that they could discover if they have access to good information, if they have access to education. And the people who really learned most from that in that era were the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence and who framed the concept of this nation. And what they argued, not for everybody at the time, of course, but what they argued ideologically was that the way that you could create a society in which everybody had access to vote and to agree to live under a certain set of rules was by making sure people were educated and had accurate information. And that might sometimes go in a way a politician wanted, or it might go in a way it didn't want. But beginning in the period after World War II, that concept of public education, and by the way, let me throw out here, many people don't think about this, but if you've ever read Laura Ingalls Wilder, do people still read the Little House books? Okay, so remember, Laura Ingalls Wilder spent her teenage years in South Dakota. Now, South Dakota, when many people think about it in the late 19th century, they don't really think about education. But the reason that the Ingalls family was working so hard to earn money to make clothing for Mary to go away to college was because Mary, who was blind and would never really be able to participate fully in society in that era with that kind of a disability, um, was going to be sent by the state of South Dakota to a college, a 6-year college in, I want to say Iowa, but I might be wrong about that, because they cared so deeply that their citizens, all of their citizens, would be educated. That was important to the construction of democracy. But after World War II, those people who were trying to destroy the idea of the liberal consensus, the idea that the government should, regulate business and provide a basic social safety net and promote infrastructure and protect civil rights and underpin this rules-based international order that's being torn down around us even as we speak, they recognized that people liked that. That was popular among Democrats, independents, Republicans. That was really popular. So they started to back away from the idea that everybody should have good information. And they started from the position that people should, first of all, be religious, and second of all, buy into the idea of what they called individualism, or the idea that you shouldn't have any regulations on business, that people in business should be able to do whatever they wanted to do. And that kind of has snowballed since then to get us to a place where the extremists in our society want to limit what children can learn, want to limit what people can learn, because it's not just in schools that they're trying to limit information. They're also going after the Smithsonian. They're also going after the different ways in which people get information through Stars and Stripes, which was a great, maybe still is because they haven't made their cuts yet, but a great newspaper for the troops, going after the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They're really trying to limit the information that people can have. And why do they want to do it? Look at a place like Russia. Look at a place like North Korea. The way you try to keep people in check is by limiting the information that they have. And just to say that that doesn't work, I mean, it can work in the short term, but one of my favorite stories is that one of the things that really helped to weaken the control of the Soviets over the people in their borders when the Soviet Union was starting to fall apart was that people would sneak in LPs, long playing records, but they didn't actually have the ability to sneak in the records themselves. What they would do is they would make copies of the records on X-rays. How freaking cool is that? They would get X-ray film because X-ray film could hold the whatever it is that one presses a LP out of. And one of the ways that historians see where that music went is by being able to examine nowadays the remaining X-rays, because you can see how when they went press to press, they would degrade. So, trying to keep things away from people is a totalitarian as well as an authoritarian tactic. But I love the human spirit that says,
Yes,
by God, we want to know what Led Zeppelin sounds like.
that's incredible. Both that you know that and that they did that, both are very incredible to me. All right. With that, I want to bring on one of our Red, Wine, and Blue Trouble Nation leaders to ask a question. Hi, Ellen. So,
Hello.
Heather, Ellen saw our event with you that brought a lot of attention to Project 2025 in a couple years ago, and it inspired her to start a Troubled Nation group with Red, Wine, and Blue in Iowa. They are called Democracy Every Day. We are so glad to have you back on here. And I know that you have a question for Heather about Project 2025.
I do. Thank you for having me, Heather. You helped so many Americans, starting with me a year and a half ago, understand Project 2025 and why it is so alarming. We've learned Project 2025's ultimate goal is to centralize power in the executive branch and then weaken all the checks and balances. And we're seeing this play out in real life lately with ICE. We just saw with the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis that it seems like ICE has no oversight, operates with complete immunity. How can Congress help block some of these executive branch actions? And why does it matter if we contact Congress?
All right. So, first of all, funding is on the table right now because we're in the process of the royal we, right? Congress is in the process of passing these appropriations bills, and there are 12 appropriations bills to fund the government that correspond to the different committees that have to figure out how to appropriate money for different parts of the budget. All right, so that's one place right now where people are putting pressure. But there's also the fact that, in fact, legally, ICE does not have immunity. ICE is this idea that they can operate however they want is coming from White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who is saying that in a lot of places, and it isn't true. So that idea that Stephen Miller is the one putting that out there, I think points to the fact that Miller is not elected. He is not popular. And that's another place to put pressure on our electeds to say, how come these guys, not just Stephen Miller, but also Russell Vought at the Office of Management and Budget, who is the one implementing Project 2025 and who was also a key author of it, how come they have so much power and you guys aren't reining that in? So there are a couple of pressure points there. But the larger question of why it matters that we push back, I think you can see all around us. Because again, our country is based on we the people. We literally gave our power to the government in the Constitution for them to represent us in the laws that they write. And if we don't like what they're doing, they lose the legitimacy that we gave them in the Constitution by saying that we the people are giving you our power. And you can see that they notice and they care about Americans doing that. So going back to the Department of Government Efficiency, one of the things that people are not seeing yet, but I think is well, you're going to see it soon enough, is if you look at those appropriations bills, Trump in his budget for 2026 wanted draconian cuts across everything. I mean, it was really kind of a bonkers budget. And in the negotiations over that budget, a huge amount of that money has been returned. So again, it's still a Republican Congress. There is still a Republican budget, and there still are some cuts, but it's nothing like Trump wanted. And the reason that I tie that to the pressure is because, of course, the Democrats didn't want those cuts. But you know who signed on to not making those cuts? The Republicans. So the more that we push back, the more that electeds see that this is going to affect whether or not they're going to get reelected, the more they change their behavior. And sometimes we don't get to see as much of that as we would like because a lot of it seems incremental. But ICE is phenomenally unpopular. The only thing right now less popular than the way ICE is behaving is the idea of invading Greenland, which are right now Trump's two big signature issues. So the pushing back and making people understand that this is not really what we want is really the key to turning things around. And one of the things that's so cool about Red, Wine, and Blue is that essentially what Red, Wine, and Blue does is pulling together the kinds of anti-extremist voices that the extremists began to pull together in 1964 after the failure of Barry Goldwater's presidential campaign. That campaign basically rolled over into what were called things like coffee clatches, and those managed to change the entire American society gradually over time. Well, we're doing the same thing at Red, Wine, and Blue. We're just doing it a lot faster by changing that political and social way of looking at the world. So thanks for all you're doing.
Ellen, thank you so much. Now I'm excited to bring on Jess. Jess is one of our Red, White, and Blue Trouble Nation leaders in Virginia who started her group, PWC Women That Whine, love, 1 year ago after watching our Zoom with you, Heather, on Inauguration Eve. So really 1 year from exactly today. Jess was so inspired by her experience as a Trouble Nation leader and her interactions because of it that she has decided to go back to school after 20 years to get her master's in public policy. And I believe, Jess, you're like reporting from campus.
Yes, I'm actually in the Scalia Library at George Mason University in Alexandria. And I just finished my political communications class, and it's amazing. And it was definitely the kick in the butt that I needed. I was in fetal position, drinking wine in bed last year at this time. And here I am, learning and growing.
Jess, I think you have a question tonight for Heather about attacks on our reproductive freedom, which has been flying under the radar more lately.
Yes. And this kind of goes back to holding officials accountable for their actions. So over the last year, we've had coordinated attacks on reproductive freedoms. There's been limits on abortion medications. We have restrictions on emergency care. There's been criminalization of doctors and patients, wildly unpopular. Members of the Trump administration have been instructed to not talk about it and stay very quiet until the midterms. So they're trying to go under the radar on this one. How can we stop these attacks from being hidden? Like, how do we broadcast this? And how significant is this moment in the long fight over reproductive autonomy in the United States?
So, this is a really good question and a really good observation because, in fact, you're correct. We're not seeing much about the attacks on reproductive rights, and they're very important, as you say. They're very unpopular, and they are not getting the kind of press that they did immediately after and a few months after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. One of the things that has happened since Roe, the overturning of Roe, is that anti-abortion activists always manage to frame anti-abortion legislation as being a way to protect fetuses, to be good for people. And those who are interested in reproductive freedom kept talking about public health, about the fact this is not about the kinds of things that anti-abortion people are talking about. It's about protecting public health. And one of the things that happened very quickly after the Jackson Women's Health decision was it became clear that that framing was the correct one, that women and children were dying, and they were dying in truly horrific ways. And those stories have not stopped. ProPublica has been all over this. There are a number. Jessica Valenti is all over it every single day. She writes every day. The 19th is all over it. Another magazine, an online magazine. Those stories that talk about how these policies are actively hurting families, women and families, as well as children, are important politically, speaking of political communications, because it moves it from the idea that for so long after the time anti-abortion language really got integrated into the political system in 1972, the year before Roe, by the way, which is an interesting story. That language became integrated into our political system as one in which selfish women, the kind of people they're calling the awful women now, what did we just say before this? Affluent, white,
Female.
females,
No.
urban liberals. That those are the people who were getting abortions on, for birth control. They were supposed to be. They're just doing it almost for fun, right? But that idea that in fact reproductive health care is health care, and it's important to the whole community, because if you lose a mother to sepsis, for example, after a miscarriage, or is somebody who's unable to get an abortion she needs because of preeclampsia, or all the things that can happen. What you're doing then is you're including the entire political community, especially the men, because if that woman dies, she's leaving behind those children and making him, putting him in charge of a family that is now motherless, and you are taking away from the family the right to make choices about it. That is, for all this idea that it empowers men to have anti-abortion legislation, in fact, what it really does is it takes away from men the ability to participate with their wives in decisions about their families. And that, we know, is extraordinarily powerful as a political motivator. So that switch in language, and then making sure that we talk about those things, not just in the major newspapers, but that we share them on Facebook. We look at these stories, these truly horrific stories that are out there every single day, but that are not getting picked up. And I agree with you. We need to do more with that, especially now as ICE is pretty obviously targeting women pretty heavily. And there's a wonderful piece out today, I think it was, that came from the 19th, got picked up, I believe, by Talking Points Memo, where they said, the number of people that are being really badly and in fact killed by ICE are women. And we're really not singling that out, and we ought to be. So more power to you. And we should all be making a bigger deal of this than we have been.
Thank you, Jess. And thank you for inspiring so many of us that you
Yeah,
just
that's
going out there,
cool.
organizing your community, becoming this master's in public policy. It's awesome. I can't wait to keep learning from you.
Thank you.
It's awesome. Thanks, Jess.
Great.
Okay. All right. So I want to circle back and bring on another one of our Red, Wine, and Blue Trouble Nation leaders. This is Kathleen. 1 year ago, Kathleen watched our event with you, Heather, and was inspired to start her group, which is called Team No Nonsense, and they are in New Jersey. Kathleen, it's so good to have you back. And I understand that your group, and one of the things I love about Red, White, and Blue's Troubled Nation is that we really have our leaders based on knowing what's going on the ground where they live, but also the passions of the community members that they're working with and that, of their neighbors to drive the focus of their group. And so I think this is so cool that Kathleen, you all have been working closely with the National Ukrainian Association to hold rallies, raise money for students in Ukraine. So you've got a question for Heather about what is going on the international stage.
Yes. Hi, Heather. Yes, we really have enjoyed supporting local Ukrainians. We have a large population here in North Jersey. And over the past year, we have seen our U.S. foreign policy completely upended, starting with Ukraine, moving to Gaza and Venezuela, and now Greenland, as you mentioned earlier. And we've also seen all of these long-standing U.S. diplomatic norms strained and openly violated. What are the risks, both abroad and here at home, when a country that once claimed to be the defender of democratic norms starts ignoring them?
Sadly, this is front and center right now, right? Because literally starting about 48 hours ago now, Trump is openly taking on the destruction of NATO, and he's also hitting out at the UN as well. I actually wrote about that for tonight. He is pretty openly trying to destroy the rules-based international order that the diplomats from countries all around the world put together after World War II to create a system of rules that would make sure that big countries didn't invade smaller countries and that might didn't make right, and that we would have freedom of the seas and world trade that would create a rising standard of living around the world. And in fact, after World War II has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty and has kept us from having a world war. That now, I hate to say it, but Mark Carney, who's the Prime Minister of Canada, gave a speech today at the Davos, the World Economic Forum at Davos in Switzerland, in which he said something that people like Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State under Joe Biden, had said before, and that's that rules-based international order is no longer viable. That because it is so fully, and this is Carney's words, not mine, and not what Blinken would have said either, but because it has enabled certain so much economic integration that has done so much for so many countries, it is now permitting certain countries, he didn't mention Trump by name, but to use economic pressure to coerce other countries. And that's not viable for those countries. So he talked about that and what that looks like. And a lot of us, myself included, have been extremely concerned that what Trump is pushing toward is what Vladimir Putin has argued for a long time, getting rid of the rules-based international order so that a few big countries, and you can tell he pretty much means Russia, the United States, and China under Xi Jinping, would be able to be the big dogs in the fight. And all the smaller countries would have to do what they said. But really what that means is that those smaller countries are going to start to gang up with each other so that they have a little bit more power. And if you look at what's happened to Ukraine, you recognize that what really put them in a bad position was giving up their nuclear weapons so that on the promises that nobody would invade. And so maybe people are going to start to go into nukes again. And that looks pretty likely. There was a big article today in the Bulwark by J.V. Last talking about that. And in the Atlantic yesterday by Robert Kagan saying the same thing. That's a world that many of us are extremely concerned about. Me being one of the people that's at the head of the list saying that. But Carney's speech was really important, and I urge everybody to look at it because he suggested a different kind of foreign policy future that pulls from what Biden and Blinken did, but I think has an answer that they didn't. And I'll cut to the chase here. What he is suggesting is that it is possible for the rest of the world operating at this point without the United States, to create a system that basically looks like taking the European Union and applying those principles to the globe as a whole. That is, rather than getting everybody to move in the same direction at the same time, or to divide the world into friends and enemies, or to think of authoritarians versus democracies, or all the ways that we have tended to divide the world, we have the ability to create what they call variable geometry. Blinken called it diplomatic variable geometry. But to take the world and create what I call ad hoc committees. That is, if we all care about fentanyl, or not we all call, the countries that care about fentanyl, China, Mexico, the United States, Venezuela, different countries, can come together, and whether we're ruled by autocrats or by democracies or whatever, we can work on that particular issue. And that business of creating, again, I'm going to call them ad hoc committees, has the potential to create a much more stable world that permits the kinds of um, global integration without the weakening of making somebody so vulnerable economically that they're at the risk of having somebody like Trump do what he's doing. It's a really interesting vision. It's one that I believed in under Blinken and Biden, although I thought they were missing a piece. And it looks to me like, because Carney didn't have to have their piece of having the United States at every table, that being a mid-sized country, he is able to say, we don't actually need any big dogs here. We can invite the big dogs along sometimes, but we don't have to have them all the time. That actually gives us a vision of the future that looks weirdly a lot like James Madison's Federalist Number 10, when he said, you don't have to worry in a democracy, a huge democracy, about one group becoming the big dog, because they'll all split into factions. Well, we know that that is no longer true on the national level, because the world has become so integrated. Carney seems to be suggesting, and of course he doesn't reference Federalist Number 10, that we could do that at an international level. And let me tell you, as you know, hope in this has been thin on the ground, as we're watching a man with squirrels in his brain trying to tear apart things that geniuses built over generations. But when Carney gave that speech, I thought, I can see that. I don't know if they can make it happen. I don't know if we can make it happen, but I have been beside myself at the destruction of the system that has kept this world relatively secure and prosperous for the last 80 years. And for the first time, I thought, that's a vision that might work. So I remain concerned in the short term on any number of things, and very concerned in the long term, but I am not hopeless.
That
Whenever
was an
you have
answer I could
hope.
get behind, Kathleen. How are you feeling?
Yeah, whenever you have hope, we have hope, Heather.
Well, I have hope because of what you all are doing. We're doing this together. And 10 years ago, none of us would have been on this call. And, Jess wouldn't have been back in school, and you wouldn't have been working with Ukraine. And, we're in a whole new world.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Kathleen, for everything you're doing, and we'll stay in good touch. We've got to talk about voting rights, Heather. We just did our member survey at Red, White, and Blue, actually, and voting rights came through for the first time as the number one issue of concern for 2026. Look, we've come together to help stop the SAVE Act so far, but we have seen extreme gerrymandering in so many states. We have an expected Supreme Court decision coming any week now that could have massive civil rights implications for the Voting Rights Act. What do you think we should anticipate this year? What are you most worried about? How do you think we prepare?
I'm worried about voting rights like everybody else. It is my top issue as well, always has been. And we're not in a good place. And that's not to say that Trump is going to do something unexpected, in the sense that we have not had free and fair voting rights in this country since at least the 1980s. We've had voter suppression, we've had gerrymandering, we've had the flood of money into our voting system. All of those things are true. There are things we can do in the short term, though. First of all, is to make sure that you and all the people around you are registered. You
Yes.
think you are, but people flip off, slide off the rolls, they get challenged. I discovered at one point that one of my sons had been thrown off the voting rolls in our town. It was not a difficult matter for him to get himself back on, but that does happen. And make sure that, you and people are registered to vote. Now, in addition to that, this is an issue really to keep up pressure at the state level, especially, also at the national level, but at the state level where so many voting rules are being written. And here in Maine, which is where I am, we managed to turn back an attempt to stop mail in ballots, which in Maine, because we have such an older population, would have affected about 40% of the ballots. So being involved locally and really pushing for voter access at the state level, and also organizing with the national groups that are trying to protect voting at the national level and within their own states is really important. So doing things like making sure that we don't get the SAVE Act, that which would have made it very difficult for women to vote, that we are able to protect voting rights for people, able to get people registered, and making sure they understand just how important it is to vote. Now, we know going into 2026 that those people who are interested in progressive causes have way more enthusiasm for voting than those who don't, which is a really good sign. But there is going to be a real concerted effort to make sure that they don't make it to the polls. So now is the time to get organized on that front and to make sure people are registered, and also, incredibly crucially, to make sure that every single race in your state is contested. Even
Yeah.
if you know you're going to lose, making sure that you're out there, somebody is out there letting people know that there are alternatives and that they're advertising those alternatives. That makes all the difference. So, yeah, let's fight on that front as well.
And if you've ever thought about it, no, this is not something you have to do alone. These local Troubled Nation groups will have your back. Heather and I will have your back. There are so
Great.
many offices that we need to run. And it's right. We have to contest every race. Over 400 red, white, and blue members have now run for local office. Let's get those. Let's bust through that 500 this year. But it's going to go even higher. Speaking of elections, I think the 2025 elections went better than even you and I anticipated. Democratic candidates made huge gains, New Jersey, Virginia, all across the country when it came to rejecting extremism in states like mine, Ohio, others like Pennsylvania, Michigan. There was a lot of nonpartisan races where extremists lost badly in places where Trump had won oftentimes. This is something that is giving me hope. It's making me see shifting coalitions. It's and I just wonder what else you're looking at. You have written about signs of the MAGA movement splintering. What are you seeing right now that indicates that indeed extremism is losing its grip?
I love the way you put that, because what we really are seeing is a wide range of Americans from a wide range of political persuasions coming together to say we don't want the extremists. And what's interesting about that is that Trump put together a coalition in 2024 by promising everything to everybody. I think I said to you back when we talked about Project 2025, he has promised that he's going to both, lower prices and raise tariffs. And that's like saying you can be wet and dry at the same time. You just can't do it. So a lot of people thought that he was promising them things that he could never deliver. And as those things are not getting delivered, those people who are angry at that are willing to take a look at our society again and to say, okay, I didn't want that. What do I want? We saw the same thing in the 1850s. We saw the same thing in the 1890s. We saw the same thing in the 1930s. And what they said was not, oh, I want that political party. What they said is, hey, this system was not working for me. So, what does a system that does work for me look like? And
Yes.
we're in that time now where, it makes very strange bedfellows, where, I often find myself truly shocked that I'm on the same side of a political question as people that I truly loathed 20 years ago. I mean, I just I feel like I'm back in the 1850s, because people who were on opposite sides came together because they recognized that their real enemy were people who were trying to destroy their democracy. So in this moment, what I am looking at is the ways in which people are building these coalitions that aren't a question of a Republican switching to become a Democrat or a Democrat sort of going back to the principles that worked in the 1960s, but that are more saying, hey, it's 2026. What do we need in this country? And we
Yes.
have a much better idea what we need, having watched where the guardrails we thought were aren't. So I'm
Yes.
watching that, but yes, the MAGA coalition is cracking. It's cracking, as we said, over the economy. It's also cracking over the Epstein files. Whatever is in those files is must be napalm because the administration does not want those to come out. And that's itself a really big deal. And then also MAGA is cracking over Trump's foreign adventures because a lot of the MAGA people um, were isolationists. And one of the people that I watch as a bellwether, and that's not at all to suggest a political coalition with her, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, the former representative from Georgia, seems to me to be trying to find a political foothold outside the MAGA movement. And that's a really interesting bellwether. And a bellwether is, the sheep that's out in front of everybody else wearing the bell, because she's clearly walking away from MAGA as it exists in order to pick up MAGA in a future incarnation. And she appears to think that it's got to soften itself in an awful lot of ways, which suggests she, anyway, thinks it's going to move back toward the center. So in this moment, the thing that I like to emphasize is that, listen, we're all tired and frightened. Am I allowed to swear on this? I never swear.
Of course, Heather.
The shit that is happening is bonkers. All right, there, I said it. But for all that, we have been through times when the shit was bonkers before.
Yeah.
And when that happened, if people understood that they had to recreate American democracy in new ways to take on the new problems the nation was facing, westward expansion, industrialization, international activities, nuclear weapons, in those moments, and in the present, of course, the internet and the concentration of wealth around the world, in those moments, we have always been able to come back to the principles that we have a right to be treated equally before the law. We have a right to have a say in our government. We have a right to have equal access to resources, including education and healthcare. When we come back to those principles and recognize that we just have to figure out a way to make them happen in these new conditions, we build a better society. And that's worth thinking about and working toward in the present. Because for all that we got to stop what's happening, we also got to build the future. And that part is interesting.
All right, Heather, that was beautifully said. The way I might say it is when shit gets bonkers, it's time to get shit done. So we're going to keep doing that now, too. Heather, over the weekend, you wrote that heroism is neither being perfect nor doing something spectacular. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's regular, flawed human beings choosing to put others before themselves, even at great cost, even if no one will ever know, even as they realize the walls might be closing in around them. We are seeing so many people in Minneapolis doing that right now. We are seeing each of the women who came on and asked questions of you tonight doing that right now. No matter where any of us are, we can all find ways of serving our communities and our neighbors in our own ways. Red, Wine, and Blue's Troubled Nation was built just for that. So can you just say a word of goodbye and saying why that is so important?
I love the idea of everybody just doing whatever they can do, whatever that looks like. And look at what the people who came here tonight talked about, the difference that they made. That we can all do. But the reason that Red, Wine, and Blue is so important is not just because you get shit done and because women really do know how to make things happen. And the men and the people who support them, of course, as well. Those things are all important. But, one of the things that people like me hear a lot is, I'm just one person. What can I possibly do? And my friend Rebecca Solnit always says, find someone else. Then you're two people. And then if you each find someone else, you're four people. And pretty soon you got enough people that you're a movement. And that's one of the things that finding your squad enables you to do, is to have those people around you. So it's not just you anymore when you go to a school board meeting, or when you show up to collect food, or when you try and change the way your state works. That's what Trouble Nation does, and, I love being part of it. I love having you guys out there, and I love welcoming other people to be part of it, because this really is how you change society and ultimately how we build a better world.
Amen to all of that. Thank you, Heather, so
Thanks
much
for
for
having
walking
me.
us through what the last year has been and why we're going to continue to keep fighting back.
How to Not Lose Your Shit is a podcast from Red Wine and Blue. It's hosted by Katie Paris and LaFonda Cousin and produced by Amy Thorstensen. To learn more about Red Wine and Blue, you can find us on social media, on the Red Wine and Blue app, or on our website at redwine.blue.
Look around, there's something going down, but we're looking up. No matter how they try to take us down, we're gonna keep it up. We move with confidence, we're making a difference wherever we are. Good trouble is not too far. We've got the fire, we've got the grit, through the thick of it. So powerful we are. So powerful we are. So if you see us coming, just know we're making a change, and we're not running. No, we're not going away. We stand together and we can stop the rain. Just know that if we came to make a change. Make a change, make a change, make a change. Oh yes, we came to make a change. Make a change, make a change, make a change, make a change. Oh yes, we came to make a change. Together, side by side, troublemakers, heads held high. Oh, the journey may be long, but we still keep singing our song. So if you see us coming, just know we're making a change, and we're not running. No, we're not going away. We stand together, and we can stop the rain. Just know that if we came to make a change. If you see us coming, just know we're making a change, and we're not running. No, we're not going away. We stand together, and we can stop the rain. Just know that if we came to make a change. Make a change, make a change, make a change. Oh yes, we came to make a change. Make a change, make a change, make a change, make a change. Oh yes, we came to make a change. RWB. We came to make a change. RWB. We came to make a change.